this week, as we begin to our second week on silence, oops, move up to what I talked about in my email for the week was this idea of fighting fair. And so I guess I'd like to know what it means to you. What does it mean to fight fair? And what helps you do that? Yeah, Christo.
One thing that I'm thinking of is, I guess because my rabbi is deaf, so I keep leaning towards hearing issues. She has a disadvantage that she can't always hear, even with a cochlear implant. And so it's not related really to the whole fighting aspect, but making sure that the way I communicate with her is effective where she understands everything I'm saying. So oftentimes I'll sign because it helps her understand what I'm saying, especially since I mumble a lot. So maybe looking at a different perspective of someone with hearing loss or someone who is maybe blind, legally blind, you can warn them if something is nearby them, like there's a step to your, so many inches or so many feet to your left or your right, just discreetly let them know. I'm not sure where to really take that exactly, just knowing that they have the same access to information or capabilities that you do is a different way of framing it.
Yeah, thank you. I like that. I guess what I'm hearing is, communicate in a way that you will be understood. And quite literally, in the case with you and your rabbi, if they have using sign language, etc. Wonderful. Thank you. Marianne.
When my husband and I fight, we sometimes use a technique where he will just talk and I'll try to repeat it back and I'll say, tell me more. And then I try to summarize it for him and I try to empathize with what he's feeling, and he'll do the same thing for me. And that has really helped us a lot in our disagreements.
Yeah, so repeating things back, summarizing a disagreement, slowing things down. Wonderful. I don't know whether it's Frank or Linda.
Tom, you may want to go out.
The most helpful for me has been to pause and reflect instead of jumping into the fray. And I think I've almost mastered the jumping in. So I'm working on pausing, not responding too quickly.
Not responding too quickly. Wonderful. If you two want to give us a demonstration of an argument, that's okay too. Where, no, okay, that's fine. Couldn't resist is one of the few partnered people here on this call together. So we don't have Paul and Carrie this week. Karen.
Mine is threefold. One is to use I phrases rather than you phrases. The second is to engage patience, savlanut, to not be impatient. And the third is finding the right time. Phyllis Diller has this, was it you who wrote Phyllis Diller's line about don't go to bed angry, stay up and fight? That might not be the best time to fight. I find that if there's an issue where I really need somebody else to see my side, I need to do it at a time when the other person is available. to hear me and to discuss it.
Yeah.
Maybe their optimal time of day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Karen. And Phyllis Diller's advice may not be for everyone. But I think your patience idea is really interesting, because also another part of patience is enduring something that's uncomfortable. And when we're in an argument with someone, it can be really uncomfortable, and we want to like get right in there and relieve the discomfort. Whereas if we're slowing down, it's that much extra a piece of work. So I think that's a very astute suggestion, is to understand patience, that the fight will still be there if you slow down for 5 minutes. Lillian.
I was going to say that it's important to fight fair. It's important to not forget that people are in different places, and to remember to hold space for where that other person may be, and also to recognize that we have different capabilities or abilities, and not to take advantage of someone who's in a bad spot, or not in, like someone else had just mentioned, I think Karen, about the timing, making sure the timing works, and respecting if they say if they need time, respect that. Like, okay, it's like you said, it's gonna wait. So we need to be mindful and respectful of hearing the other person and the person hearing us, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Lillian. So we'll hear from Sue and then Frank, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper.
So, Greg, when you asked Linda and Frank to give us an example of fighting, because they're the couple it made me smile, and it made me think about the sense of humor. And I have a good sense of humor in conversation, in communication. I like to throw that in, but sometimes I think it's good to remember, and I need to work a little bit more on this myself, but when we're in the heat of the moment in an argument, maybe a sense of humor, or just take a step back and a light moment, I think is a really good idea for the conversation in a fight.
Thank you. Frank.
Yeah, just two thoughts for me. I've noticed over the years that if I'm standing, when I'm talking to Linda, that we will misunderstand each other, and I have less patience, I think. So now if we're going to talk about something, and I'm not talking about an argument, just discussing something, I know that if I sit down, it's easier.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of. The other thing I was thinking about is, especially if we give it a pause, is because when we are in an argument with somebody, actually it allows us to become closer. And the way to become closer is we've been talking about it, is how do we by listening. So actually an argument is really, what's the word? It opened the doors for having deeper relations with the people that we care about.
Yeah, thank you. We're in a positive relationship, then that can, lead, that sort of healing process can lead to more closeness. Okay, Martin, do you mind holding your comment just for the moment? Because I want to get on to some other stuff. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I want to talk about one of our assumptions, and there's a number of these that I think play into where we are and where we're going today. One is that we have free will, but it's not always accessible. And another is that we were driven between the conflict between the evil inclination, which the Hebrew for that is the Yetzer Hara, and the good inclination, which is the Yetzer Hatov. And this isn't, just a reminder for all of us, this isn't about like evil as in sort of, murderous, terrorist-y type evil. It's really, you could think of it as a conflict between our hindbrain and our forebrain, or our strong emotions, our anger, our jealousy, our sexuality, and kind of the connecting emotions like compassion and other things. And these are two different tendencies that we have within. So let me just pause here for a second, and we'll get a couple comments on those. Martin, did you want to comment on this? You're still mute. If you could unmute, please.
The question, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, the question was about arguing. Is that right?
We were talking about arguing before, but also, kind of this more general free will, conflict, evil inclination and good inclination.
Okay. Let's see. So if someone's arguing, if they have evil in their heart, that's pretty hard to take, obviously. So, my belief is that there's someone. Everybody has a soul. If someone needs to speak in evil terms, I guess just let them vent and don't interrupt. So, is that the question? And that we're discussing? I came in late. So good. Yeah.
We were talking about that a bit, and yeah, it's sometimes rather than saying someone is evil in their heart, more about like if someone's getting carried away with their emotions, like that's where I think about like when I get a little bit triggered and get a little bit too carried away. So I might be saying something before I have a chance to kind of slow down, as some other people kind of talked about.
Okay. Well, I was on the receiving end of that kind of a person where they was a client, and they were upset, and so just did not interrupt. And so then I responded appropriately to their concern. I got an email from them the next day saying they apologized. So the patience paid off, and then not interrupting them as they were in their tirade, and the problem got resolved. So, and they apologized. So, but it's patience, I guess. And then if they need to say their things, don't interrupt. That's my motto. Do not interrupt that.
Great, thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, I also wrote a little bit about this too. I think sometimes what's the evil inclination is like ego and desire to be right and to win and argument and whatever. And that's not really conducive to a two-way conversation. So I guess it's a good idea for the other person to be quiet and let that person rant on. But it just reminded me, I mean, I was in a relationship like that, very frustrated. I couldn't speak as fast, and I wasn't, argumentative, and so I just felt frustrated. And I didn't feel like this other person was always right, I just felt like I lost the argument, which kind of reminded me of what was that program, Firing, William F. Buckley, Firing, what was the name? I can't remember the name of the program.
Firing Line, the old
Thank you, Firing Line. Then he was firing something. Yeah, like I remember the time he had Norman, somebody, some old lefty on, and the guy was really old. And so what William Buckley did was he talked really fast, and the other guy couldn't get a word in. But like, to me, that's not a debate. I mean, maybe that's what debate teams do, but that's not really a discussion of ideas or anything like that.
Thank you, Joanne. Sue.
I think a lot of it goes back to humility when I think about my arguments and my ego. when I'm in an argument, I want to be right. I think, Joanne, you mentioned that. It's like, I want, this is my opinion. And it does sometimes to me feel like a debate. And I really dislike that because, and so I guess the idea is maybe to just, the silence that we're looking at right now is listen, be silent. And instead of trying to get my point of view and I'm right, just listen and give the other person, maybe take a back seat to my ego, to my humility, and listen to the other person and give validity to what their opinion is, rather than having to put that's where I feel like the argument, if I keep trying to get my opinion and the other person, has their opinion and we're not getting anywhere. So, and I think it's a lot is my ego that I want to be right. And this is what I'm saying and you're not listening. Whereas it's just that they have a different opinion.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. Martin.
Yes, to Sue's point, yeah, seeking to understand the other person rather than trying to be understood. Pretty basic rule, I think, of communications.
Understood. Yeah, seeking to understand. Nancy.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to say all this, but I'm sorry I wasn't here last week to hear the first part of the silence, because this is a very meaningful topic for me. But I got notice my kids said they were getting married. So I went shopping for my daughter-in-law's wedding dress. I always wanted a daughter. So now I get to be the mother because she doesn't have a mother. And so I took that place and I went shopping for her dress last Thursday. And we finally closed on my condo Friday. I got the check. So all is done. But I'm beginning to feel that I can't say anything anymore, because what comes to my mind, not in terms of really arguments or whatever, but just saying something nice. And I did not realize that sometimes I don't say things that are nice. And one example was, we were looking for a dress for my daughter-in-law. They're getting married December 27th, so it was a rush. And we went to a designer's bridal shop. And I really have to watch what I say. And again, now I'm feeling I can't say anything to anybody unless it's a compliment in any kind of discussion or whatever. And my daughter-in-law comes out and I'm like, oh, that dress is kind of funky. And later when we left, she goes, Nancy, that's the designer's dress. You just called her dress funky. And I didn't mean it bad. It was just different. And then I've had it pointed out that, and maybe what some of the others have talked about is ego. I don't want to make it sound like I'm holier than thou than somebody who I'm talking to, but it's come to my attention that sometimes I try to make a point. So now instead of making a point, let's just kind of talk about it. And then the other thing that's really hard with silence and saying the right thing is text. And I said something last week that I thought was very benign, and my friend got so mad at me. And it was just like, really? So it's like, what are we supposed to do with silence? I'm paying much more attention in my life about everything I do and say before I say anything. So it's a excuse me, it's a big circle of a lot of things and emotions and everything when it comes to really talking to people.
It's really hard. Yeah. I think this is a good point to just take a quick peek at our silence mantra again, and the spectrum of silence, which is almost exactly what Nancy was talking about. The full quote is, before you speak, stop and reflect. What benefit will my speech bring to me or others? So, if we have too little silence, we can say something hurtful. But if we have too much silence, we've lost an opportunity to be helpful or to give praise. And so if we have too much talking, it can get into flattery and sort of, harmful speech. And so this is a really big topic. It's a complicated one. So yeah, thanks for naming that, Nancy. All right, so I had a couple of interesting places. So may I have a volunteer to read this quote from Maimonides? Oops, and that quote just went away. The quote is back.
The sages of yore said, "He who yields to anger is as if he worshipped idolatry." See Nedarim 22b. They also said, "Whosoever yields to anger, if he be a wise man, his wisdom leaves him, and if he be a prophet, his prophecy leaves him." Maimonides, Nishmei Torah, Human Dispositions 2:3.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and I'll copy this quote into the chat. Okay, so here's another angle, something we haven't completely talked about. Where does anger fit in? What is Maimonides talking about? Yeah, Sue.
Well, when you said where does anger fit in, I thought about the 13 attributes of God, which I believe is in this coming Torah portion, which is slow to anger. and there you go.
So when we're quick to anger, it's almost like worshiping idols, what does that mean? Yeah, Joanne.
I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's like being in your ego and not being in touch with your spirituality so much, or your inner, or with the other person.
Mhm.
And they had all those things about like a prophet loses prophecy when they get angry. And I think, this happened in the Bible maybe to Moses and one of the forefathers, that they lost it at the end. So it just takes you further away from the center, being of listening and of compassion and all those good things.
Mhm.
All the like, I forgot who just said about the 13 attributes. Was that Sue? Yeah, it's like we're supposed to try to imitate God, and like getting angry quickly is not one of those things. I mean, he can, but he's got good reason usually, and we don't.
Thank you, Joanne. Lillian.
Me being literal, I was thinking of idols, and in many religions or faiths, the worship of an idol is like you're not in touch with God, like it's a false god. It's you're not in touch with your spirituality, you're not grounded. And so therefore if you're quick to anger, or you dive so deeply into your anger, that's like you're diving into and out of touch with God.
Yeah. There is a teaching that it's like one who worships idols, it's like they've rejected Torah in its entirety. You have completely lost your connection with God, with these attributes, with all of these teachings, because you have gone in another direction. Janet.
I'm thinking I'm in an interfaith group. I've done this before. And I have pretty strong views. For example, in Judaism, we say the Shema, which is, the worship of one God. And yet we realize that other people, that Christians also believe in one God, but they see one God differently from the way we see one God. And occasionally I've been asked over the years, well, since Jesus was one of yours, why don't you worship him? And I'm always tempted to say, yeah, well, so was Albert Einstein, but I don't worship him either. But I check myself. I don't say that. But a friend of mine who is Christian said that said that I shouldn't say what I often say, which is the Shema, our belief in God, is in the oneness, because you don't want to make somebody else wrong, particularly if you're doing interfaith work. She said, what I really should say is we have a separate covenant. That feels a little not quite real for me, but on the other hand, in the interest of peace, I guess that's what I'll say next time. We have a different covenant.
Is your friend Christian?
Yes, this particular friend is Christian.
Yeah, that's the Christian view. That's the way the Christians see the world. What you were talking about is the way that the Jews see the world. So, yeah.
What is their best answer? We just see things differently.
Yeah, I don't know. I might engage like part of the interfaith work. Just this sounds like a very rich dialogue you and your friend could have. What do you mean by a different covenant? What do you mean by what's your objection to this one God? What am I not understanding? So I don't have a recommendation for what you should or shouldn't say.
But I want to maintain the friendship. And she said that I shouldn't try to make the Christian person who says I shouldn't try to make them wrong or to show that I'm right and you're not.
Understand that. Yeah, understand that completely. Martin. Martin, if you could unmute, please.
Between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, it's the same God. It's all the God of, it's all Abrahamic. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're all the same God, even though we're having different viewpoints. But yeah, there is a unifying factor. That's just my comment.
Yeah, although I'm not sure that everyone who practices Christianity, Islam, and Judaism would actually agree that it's the same God. But
different.
I've not really studied this, but
Yeah.
that was my impression. So
Wow. So
religion
so Judaism, God of Abraham. So if there's another God, God of that's interesting question. Hey, God of who? God of who?
Well, it's like there's this God that we believe in, and
God of Abraham.
God doesn't exist. The God that we believe in is the one God that exists, and these other attributes. So I don't know. I'm running with scissors here. It's not an area of my expertise, but it's with many things. There's not one rule that fits all.
Okay, good.
All occasions. Lyndon Frank.
Yes. I'm just the next thing about what you said, Greg. I guess the way I see it is that it's, we don't want to make statements that is, universal truth, but it's truth for us, I think. And that I try to remind myself when I say something is that it's my opinion. I'm not saying that this is the answer. So this could be about anything, really.
Yeah.
But that's, it takes some cultivation of of watching oneself a little bit to not declare that something to be true, whether it's about God, our way of looking at it. I want to kind of also mention is that I look at monotheism very differently than I used to as a kid, where I was taught that others who worshiped multiple gods were whatever, worshiping idols, because it really tells me very little about those people and their morality and their spirituality.
Yeah, there's a lot. Even the Jewish definition of idol worship changed over time to be less about the number of gods and more about like how, for lack of a better word, civilized or barbaric the culture was. How humanistic it was. So, Christo.
Yeah, this goes back to Martin's comment on how Jews, Christians, and Muslims all worship the same God. In some cases, that can be true, and this comes from somebody who is a former Christian. I actually was a missionary for a long time before converting to Judaism. Some Christians believe that their most important person in the Gospels is God in the flesh, and Judaism, looking in our Tanakh, our Hebrew Bible, has many verses that says God is not a man, that God has no beginning, no end, is eternally self-existent. A lot of Christians don't believe that Jesus is God. They believe he's still the Messiah, but that he's not God. And I patiently show Christians in their New Testament where Jesus said, my Father's greater than I am. And he says, I can't do anything without my Father's approval of what I do, what my Father tells me. And so then I usually just leave them with that from their sacred text, which used to be my part of my Bible too. And I just usually just leave it at that. Don't want to argue with them, but just provide them like, here's what your scriptures say. And I end it on as good a note as I can. And still continue with interfaith dialogue, interfaith occasions, learning from each other and working together despite our many differences in beliefs and texts to see what bridges can we build while preserving appropriate boundaries between us and strengthening, making friendship connections better. I'll hush for now.
Thank you, Krista. Joanne.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that saying I have a different opinion or I have a different, well, to me, that's not strong enough. I wouldn't say I have a different belief system. On the other hand, saying I have a different covenant, which is true, might get a response, well, your covenant was nullified when ours came into being, that could be an answer. Or ours is, ours was more recent, so ours is the true one. So that could lead to an argument. I don't think that's that helpful, but I would say I have a different belief system, that there's only one God, and God is not human, never was human. And God also said, I think to David, something like, I am your father, he's everyone's father. So anyway, we're different, that's all.
Yeah, I have to say, I thank you, John. I very rarely get triggered in these groups, but I did get a bit triggered about the two covenants things, because this replacement covenant thing, which Joanne just described, it is one of like the ways that in some circumstances, Christians have put Jews down. You guys are too stupid to realize that there's a different covenant. Sorry, that was an unkind way to put it, but it's kind of, so you might want to find a third way to discuss it. Again, my opinion, but I was a little bit triggered by that thing. Lillian.
Just two things. One, clarify from myself. As far as idols go, I think many faiths that have the idols, not about the anger, but just the idols worship itself. Like I've learned through people who do have those symbols, they all see it faces of God. And it's almost we have these 13 attributes of God, and we talk about the different symbols. They just actually have a symbol for the different attributes. And then two, to the point of how to talk with others, because I definitely resonated with some of the things that were being said, and have heard actually what Joanne mentioned. Someone is saying like, well, that nullifies. So I think I've learned, because one of my very good friends is very deep in her Christian faith, and we actually do Bible study together. And we've just come to agree to disagree at times, or she's come to accept, like we talk about, the universality of God. And it's okay I can hold space for where she is and her belief and faith in Jesus. And she can hold space for me and how I view, and, doesn't always understand my view of Jesus, but she understands and respects where I'm coming from too. So it's just, having those conversations helps the dialogue. And the more honest one can be, without putting anyone down, just saying,
Mhm.
hey, you know, it's okay, we're different, and that's all right. That's okay, we can agree to disagree.
Yeah. Thank you, Lillian. Joanne, I'm going to ask if you can hold your comment just for the moment, because
Okay.
I want to share another idea before we get to breakout groups.
I didn't
Um,
think of it.
And let's see here. And that is not where I wanted to get to. So it's a statement from the Talmud, and I think we've looked at this before, but it's just that it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will be heeded. So it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will not be heeded. You know, further, one should not rebuke those who will be unreceptive to their message. And do not reprove a scorner lest they hate you. Reprove a wise person and they will love you. And I had a circumstance like this come up recently where I was talking with someone who was a party to a big conflict, and it was just very clear that they were very deep in their views. And I felt like, you know, they had contributed to the situation, but it also became apparent to me that they were not ready to go there. And so I just didn't say anything. And part of me kind of walked out of there going, why didn't you tell him or her or them this, that, or the other? And it's like, you know, but I was like, you know, that's just wasn't going to get anywhere. And so I worked on, you know, preserving the relationship and checking in with this person. And so it was a very not easy practice, but it was I felt it was a very powerful moment for me personally, just being able to let go of my ego and all of these other and needing to be right or needing to be heard, and just leaving the space for them to be them, you know, in a different flavor kind of what Lillian was talking about. Joanne, did you want to make your comment now? No, you good? Okay. So what we're going to do, what we've been doing the last few weeks, and is we've been looking at the actions in the breakout rooms. So I'm going to post these in the chat. These are from the chapter. And so to use these as inspiration to kind of think about what is something that you might do in the coming week. And I will post that as well. I think, yeah. You know, if you did an action last week, you can share that with your partner and sort of think about, based on what we've talked about or something that inspires you on this list, how might you create a silence practice for the week? So let's get the breakout rooms going. Okay. So the rooms are open. If you've been streaming, thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
Okay, well, we are back. We got a little bonus discussion from Lillian and Sue. Said, can you put me back in the room? I'm like, no, I can't. I can't figure out how to do that. So, but how were those discussions, and would anyone care to share other practice they did before or something they'd like to do in this coming week? Nancy.
Yeah, one thing that we shared, and I hope I'm getting it right, is that sometimes what we say is really the interpretation of how someone else takes it. So it's like we are really saying I don't know, something factual, or like, is it kind? Yes. Is it true? Yes. Is it necessary? Yes. But the other person is just like taking it so out of context. And so then it makes it preventing us from even wanting to talk to that person again.
Yeah.
And so, we may be very aware, but it's really the interpretation of the others. And so we can't control that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of something I was really thinking about, that hit. It was very meaningful when we kind of discussed that.
Yeah, it's really a great point. And part of what Mussar does is it sets the bar really hard. It's like the way you measure is the impact on the other person. So if the other person kind of flips out, sort of like, okay, I'm not going to bring that up again because it's not a good topic for them. And it's,
Or we have to check in with that person all the time. Like, if there's something like, is this what you meant? Kind of like what somebody said before we went in our breakout groups, check in with that person.
Mhm.
But it makes me feel like, I don't think I want to talk to anybody anymore.
Mm.
I don't want to get to that point.
Yeah, no, it is. And if there are some people who are just so sensitive about everything, it doesn't also mean that we're in the wrong. It doesn't protect them from the kind of consequences of their reactions. And if they become so reactive to everything, then that can impact the relationship. It is not only our responsibility to kind of nurture this relationship. So there's a lot of factors there. And yeah, I hear you, Nancy. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do here? So yes, we have Linda or Frank.
Well, again, this reminds me that another reason to pause, because the fact of the matter is that we are often misunderstood.
Mhm.
And just like other people, if we are misunderstood, that means that the other person is misunderstood.
Yeah.
And it's in that misunderstanding that's, again, that will allow us to come closer to that person. If we just care not to think about our fragile ego, but the opportunity to dwell into the conversation that we were having. It reminds me, Linda taught me this years ago, or she reminded me strongly about objective and subjective. And what that means is that we usually have higher regard for ourselves than for the other. We need to reverse that. We need to have higher regard in terms of listening, because that will allow us to, again, bring each other closer together.
Thank you, Frank. I always love your perspectives, and I particularly love that you use this word opportunity. It's like, okay, there's a misunderstanding, and that becomes a choice point. That becomes a free will point. There is an opportunity to try to build understanding and build healing, or there's an opportunity to throw gas on the fire and really kind of get into it. So it's just being aware that we have an opportunity is a really different way of looking at it. If everybody agrees all the time, there's not an opportunity to deepen understanding because you agree about everything. So, Linda.
Sometimes these kind of conversations help me ask questions like to myself, why did I respond like that? I don't feel good when I respond like that. What does this teach me about how I really want to be? And unfortunately, it still happens, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Our friend Shelley, who emailed me after, but couldn't be here today, she wrote, sometimes I ask myself, where is my fear and anger coming from? And these are good questions to ask. Why did I respond this way? Where is my anger coming from? Gently, like self-compassionate way. Sue.
I was just thinking as we were talking that it's really this opportunity piece, which I love, is we could learn something. You know, like if we really listen and
Mm,
didn't put our point of view, if we really listen to the other person, we're learning from them, which I never thought of before.
yeah. Lovely. Thank you, Sue. All right, friends. Well, today for our closing meditation, I actually have a poem that I'd like to read by Rachel Barenblatt. And for the last few years, I have made it a strong practice to always make sure we have at least one source from a non-male author in our discussion. So I invite you to close your eyes and take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And allow the words of Rachel Barenblatt to penetrate your soul from her poem called Silence. Abraham failed the test. For Sodom and Gomorrah he argued, but when it came to his son, no protest crossed his lips. God was mute with horror. Abraham, smasher of idols and digger of wells, was meant to talk back. Sarah would have been wiser, but Abraham avoided her tent, didn't lay his head in her lap to unburden his secret heart. Who might we unburden ourselves with? Was that friend, that confidant that we can speak our troubles to? Maybe it's professional, maybe it's clergy, maybe a relative. What can happen if we don't ask for help? What can happen when we do? These are the questions that Rabbi Barenblatt leaves with us today. When you're ready, you may open your eyes.